Hello friends, this is the second part of the story about my Cane Corso Buffy. This part will be about Buffy's life from 1 to 8 years old, her way to maturity, our family lifestyle, and as I see it now, quite a saturated story of Buffy's health problems. I will say openly about my numerous mistakes, because I see how many first-time Cane Corso owners had little to no idea how much effort and sacrifices they would have to make to grow these magnificent dogs. It won't be easy for me, but I'll do my best. Now, to not get you bored, I will try to tell you our story from the two main points: what I did correctly and what I did wrong in every important field of Buffy's upbringing. There will be 5 such major fields: socialization, training, and other activities, maintenance, Buffy's diet, and all the health issues we dealt with. But first, I'd briefly describe my life circumstances and what resources were available to me then. Our little family lived back then in the suburbs of Dnipro City, Ukraine. When Buffy appeared in our lives, I was working my shifts in the city and had 2 to 3 free days in between. After work, I moved to my hometown, and the commute took about an hour. During my work days, my mom took care of Buffy under my strict supervision. So the majority of Buffy's life was spent in our parents' home in town, or our little homestead, where I live now as well. This is still a thing in Ukraine, when young people live in a parent's home. Though it is more of an economic issue, generally, I'm not a big fan of noisy industrial cities. Also, I want you to see clearly what a homestead in Ukraine is. Not acres of land and a farm. No. It is usually a small piece of land, a small house crammed in between neighbors' homes. We have about 0.15 acres where we grow vegetables and flowers, and about the same is taken by the house, greenhouse, and garage. Besides, our neighbors' homes are so close that I can observe the theater of their day-to-day lives quite closely. So Buffy had enough space to live, but perhaps not enough to run wild about it. But thank God Cane Corso isn't that energetic breed. Otherwise, our greens and flowers would suffer constantly. And I almost forgot, neither me nor my mom are drivers, and we didn't have a car. That is briefly my life situation and accommodation at that time. Before I describe what I consider as positive or negative steps I took in this field, I want you to realize that this estimation is based on what I've learned at the time of Buffy's life, and later on, as well as on my little experience with dogs. Generally speaking, it is my opinion for the time being, and it may not coincide with yours, or may change with time and new experiences, which I still hope to gain. Okay, let's start. Socialization, what I've done well. I always dreamed about a dog I could count on in every situation. Since this breed was new to me, I tried to achieve this goal by starting our socialization process early on. I was sure that the more different things my dog would see, the more reliable she would be, which happened to become true. So at first, we walked on the quiet nearby streets. When we had an appointment at the vet clinic, we used mostly public transport, but sometimes I asked my relatives to help us with the commute or rent a taxi. It was all added up to the socialization process, not only the commute, but also the clinic, people and animals we met with, and the manipulations she had to endure, all contributed to this task. Sometimes it was the routine observation. Sometimes she needed more care. Not once did she surprise me with her tolerance for doctors. One time she had to take 5 injections in one visit, many strange people around her, and she not even slightly growled. I was impressed. So, I suspect my role in socializing with Buffy wasn't that significant. Even though I did a lot of work, I think her genetics and natural temperament, and perhaps sex, played a major role. But I leave it to you to judge what weighs more in this process, our effort or genetics. I think they go hand in hand. One feeds the other. We also visited and participated in dog shows a few times, but soon enough we both realized it wasn't our favorite activity. I was outraged with the judges, and for Buffy, it was too stressful and tiresome. Perhaps we both did not see much sense in proving Buffy's beauty. We had no doubts that she was the best of the best already. And of course, Buffy always saw people who came into our home. We never hid her from guests, though restricted her a bit to let this process without damage to both sides. She was an emotional dog and showed her emotions to the family with all the generosity of her Italian nature. What did I do wrong? Of course, the lack of our own car often played a role. From one point, sometimes we needed the car urgently due to her health problems. A few times Buffy was after surgery and needed careful transportation. But from the point of socialization, with a car, we could make the process more smooth and gradual. In a car, I could drive her to locations where she could run free without any danger, and later on gradually introduce her to the noisy surroundings. When you are on foot more often than not, you can't skip some places which can be stressful. Besides, Buffy wasn't a very hardy dog. She would benefit more from short but frequent walks, rather than long and rare ones. Walking on foot doesn't give much of such opportunities. The lack of diversity in the things she saw was another moment I would do differently today. Partly because of the problem with the car, partly because of the lack of time and strength from me. We too often walked on the same streets and visited the same locations. One negative point is a very limited experience of socializing Buffy with other dogs. We don't have dog parks in my hometown, and the culture of walking with dogs on a leash, even nowadays, is almost absent. So what Buffy saw mostly all her life was those barking dogs we met with when walked our town's streets. Mostly she encountered other dogs after we moved to the city when she was 8 years old, and this experience was less effective than it could have been. Activities and training. What I've done well. As I said earlier, we had regular walks from Buffy's early age, but except for them, she had a chance to move freely within our homestead, and of course, guard our home. She wasn't a very playful dog. I guess our favorite game was in tag of war. She loved our walks most of all, to run free and explore new areas. As a true Italian, she adored the sun and loved to bathe in the sunlight even on the hottest days. In winter, we played in the snow. She loved the snow very much. I almost always used our time together to do obedience training. For example, we had a ritual before every walk. Usually when Buffy saw me taking the leash, she became overexcited with joy and impatience to go out. So each time before we left the house, we repeated a few commands like seat and heel in the yard until she calmed down a bit, and I'd see she listened to me.
Growl. No, growl. Yes.
She usually did her toilet at walks first, and then I gave her a chance to blow off her emotions with brisk walking, free running, and playing together. Later on, we would repeat some commands like heel, seat, crawl, voice, lie down, and barrier. Not always it was successful training, but I was happy not only because she was obedient, but because she taught me how to be patient and a leader to her. It's a wonderful feeling when you see your dog's eagerness, respect, and attention to you. What did I do wrong? First of all, I had to use a harness for her more. Instead of the regular collar or chain slip collar, the latter was our day-to-day ammunition. I didn't know at the time it could be damaging to her neck. More so, I found that when you put this choke collar as high as possible on the dog's neck, closer to her ears, she is much easier to control. So each time when we had a possible risky situation nearby, I raised the collar, and she didn't have a chance to pull on the leash with all her strength. From one point, this method saved us from trouble many times. From the other, it was proved that I wasn't 100% sure of her obedience, and we had to work better on it. This moment leads to the other, the fact that I did train her myself, without any professional help. It was first of all financial question. I'd gladly work with a good trainer, but I couldn't afford it. Anyway, if I could do it today, I'd seek a trainer who works specifically with Cane Corso. Another moment I'd like to mention is the importance of managing Buffy's attention, or her focus on training. What do I mean by this? Obviously, positive reinforcement training is only successful when a dog does what you want her to do, and the bigger the number of successfully performed and rewarded commands, the more the dog learns and loves to work. So, my goal as a trainer is to make that number as big as possible. To do so, the trainer must know his dog very well. What triggers her attention most? What distracts her attention? What treats does a dog love above all? Is your dog food motivated, or are some games with the owner the best rewards? How will she perform at a certain age given certain triggers from the environment? All these factors must be considered before the training to lead the dog to successful performance. The trainer must have the dog's full attention first and be sure that the reward will be appropriate. Because Buffy was my first Cane Corso dog, I may have been less flexible and wise in choosing the right time, place, and reward for my dog training sessions. One yet moment that is somewhat connected with the previous one is the approach to punishments and negative reinforcements. The more I think about my behavior toward Buffy when she did something wrong, the more I see that it wasn't a thought-through approach. Emotions might have led me through those situations more than they should have. Don't get me wrong, I never beat my dog or anything that harsh, but she heard my angry voice all right. For example, when she behaved too badly on our walks, like pulling on the leash, I usually applied two approaches. With the first one, we stopped every few meters to do a few commands and then moved on. The second one, when she continued to tug on the leash, I made a few short and sharp pulls to make her walk close by me. But this second method never really worked. It only perhaps added to her agitation and prompted her to pull harder. What I did not understand at the time is that Cane Corso is a sensitive and intelligent breed, stubborn also, and what may work for German Shepherds won't work with this breed. So the owner better be familiar with the psychology of dogs in general, that of the breed, and specifically his pet. The best tactic is to try to prevent your dog from doing the wrong things. But when the deed is done, show your disapproval right on the spot, making sure the dog gets the message. A dog must understand what she was punished for, without fear, but with acknowledgement of the authority of the owner. Maintenance, what I've done well. Taking care of a Cane Corso dog is a relatively easy task. Even so, Buffy was mostly outside and liked to lie down in the dust. I could make her short fur shine in 10-15 minutes. Usually, I used a rubber comb or brush in combination with the dry shampoo, or without, after which I wiped her with the wet towel, and she was good to go. When her look needed more attention, we washed her with the regular dog shampoo. As I mentioned before, Buffy hated to step into the bathtub, That's why wet washing we usually did in the summer, when I could do it outside, in the yard, or her enclosure. She tolerated this procedure, but didn't like it very much. But the combing process was her favorite. More often than not, we did it before going out, and she knew it. So each time I took a comb in my hands, she was very happy, anticipating our walks. We have a piece of big tree trunk in the yard, and I taught her to stand with her front paws while I cleaned her fur. Occasionally, I cleaned her ears and her eyes. We never had problems with her claws because the hard surface in our yards and regular walks made them short. I guess this procedure can be an example of what I was saying earlier about training. When your dog loves the process and she eagerly waits for her reward, it not only makes your connection stronger but creates a base for successful training. As proof of it, Buffy was easily summoned to that tree, and more often than not, I didn't use any commands at all, because she ran there when saw me taking the comb. What did I do wrong? I think I could do better with making Buffy love water and bathing. Perhaps I've started to work on it a bit too late. It is a bit of a mystery to me why she didn't like water. I remember that Buffy even was scared to come closer to the river. It is even more astonishing to me when I remember one of my German shepherds jumping straight into the river and swimming with joy and zero persuasion from my side. Anyway, her dislike of the water in the bathtub was an issue when we lived in a flat and had no other options except to use it. So, whatever your life circumstances are at the beginning, it is wise to introduce your dog to all facilities available to humans and dogs from the earliest age possible, especially if you plan to use grooming, walking, or daycare services. Buffy's diet. What I've done well. I guess what can be considered a good thing is that I never fed Buffy junk food, sweets, or what usually belongs to common human food. Porridge, potatoes, bread, salads, and so on. The few exceptions were a carrot and a little apple sometimes. But carrot is what Buffy loved especially, maybe because it's sweet, crunchy, and not sour. So sometimes I gave it to her as a treat. At that time, I was sure that dry dog food was the best option for a dog. As I mentioned earlier, even Buffy's breeder had the same approach, and in the first 5 to 6 months, we fed Buffy Royal Canine kibble and gave her supplements for joints. But some time later, she apparently consumed a bad pack of that kibble and had problems with her pancreas. From that point began our long story of trying new dry dog foods. We ordered such brands as Pro Nature, occasionally First Choice, Akana, and Brit Care. Pro Nature and Brit Care stayed the longest on Buffy's menu. There were quite a few other brands too, but alas, I can't remember their names. I guess I must briefly explain why we changed that food quite often. There were many reasons. Some kibble she stopped eating as eagerly as before, and some she pooped out too much. Very often she got dandruff or too greasy fur. Sometimes her ears got inflamed, and from others she started farting. Some kibble contained way too much fat and carbs, and she gained extra weight. And of course, at a few periods in Buffy's life, I tried to switch her to a raw diet. My memory fails me here again because I can't say when exactly I introduced her to the raw diet the first time. She wasn't a puppy anymore, that's for sure. As we live in a town, every weekend we have a market open where one can buy fresh meats and stuff from the local farmers. So I went there and bought beef meat trimmings, tripe, and sometimes cow's head parts or a tail. I also gave her chicken carcasses and a little sea fish we call salaka, or a bit of kaplan. And of course I added raw eggs from time to time. I couldn't afford to give her muscle meat, so all she got was those that were in the meat trimmings. Of course, none of these foods were prepared to put into her bowl. I got rid of the excessive fat and bone splinters, washed the tripe and cut off excessive fat from it too, divided everything into portions, and put it into the freezer. It wasn't easy to do, but I guess I managed to feed her like that for quite a long time. But eventually, we came back to the kibble again. The main reason for this was the difficulty in managing her insulin levels when she got diabetes. She required a more consistent composition of food, and the other reason is that I wasn't satisfied with how Buffy looked. Her fur didn't look as clean and shiny as on kibble, and she seemed to me undernourished. I was afraid that I didn't make her menu balanced, and she lacked some important nutrients because she didn't have enough muscle meats. Of course, there was convenience too. It is so much easier just to put a portion of kibbles into the bowl and be off. No need to carry it all in hand, because thankfully they delivered dog food to the house. And last but not least, feeding raw properly was more expensive than dry dog food, even though we always choose super premium dog foods. Anyway, Buffy definitely enjoyed eating raw, and surely would prefer it over kibble. What did I do wrong? I think if I had switched Buffy to the raw diet earlier and stuck to it, she would be a much healthier dog. But, as it often happens, obvious things are the hardest to understand. Because what could be more natural for a carnivore than eating meat? I was convinced, as so many of us, by the shiny looks of the dogs on kibble, by the expert advice our breeder, veterinarian, and most books gave about dogs' diet. But there is the fact that those shiny, energetic dogs were gradually acquiring a whole range of human diseases they never dealt with before the era of kibble. The lack of information was a contributing factor also. I simply didn't have proper knowledge that I could rely on when considered this food question, and when I finally had, it was too late to change anything. But about that in the next section. Health, what I've done well. To credit myself and my family, we never ignored any of Buffy's health problems. Whenever it was possible to help her, we sought specialist advice and gave her all the treatment they prescribed. We also religiously kept the vaccination routine and anti-parasite treatment, but all the same, there were quite a few health problems, small and big ones. I think I list them to you in order of appearance during the period of Buffy's life between 1 and 8 years old. Here they are: ears inflammation, heartworm disease, acute inflammation of the pancreas, blocked anal glands, pyometra, diabetes. Since most of them appeared not once, and some as diabetes stayed till the end, you can imagine that this is a long list. It is painful to talk about all of this even now, 4 years after she's gone, because there will always be the feeling that I have had to do better. I've had to prevent all of this in one way or the other. But from the other point, if I had so many problems with my Cane Corso, starting 10, 15 years ago, what dogs do people get now? With all that inbreeding, kibble feeding, all the popularity this breed has gained over the years, the number of backyard breeders doing business, just don't get me started. Also, we were attentive to the food she ate and gave her supplements that her breeder or veterinarian advised us to give. As far as I remember, supplements were mostly of 2 brands, Canina and 8-in-1. But as soon as she crossed her puppyhood, I didn't supplement her, except for the multivitamins course once or twice a year. I believe that for the most part, a dog's food must have enough nutrients. But as I said, while Buffy was in the phase of rapid growth or recovering from an illness, she needed more nutrients. What did I do wrong? Alas, there are plenty of mistakes that have been made. Some were made by the lack of information, some by the inexperience, and some had an economic basis. But those that influenced Buffy's health the most were 2. Of course, it is only my theory, and I'll never know for sure, but apparently the first blow she got to her health was that bad pack of kibble that led to the acute inflammation of her pancreas. I remember that I realized that the kibbles looked a bit different, but Buffy didn't have any symptoms at first, and yes, the kibble wasn't cheap. And the second gruesome mistake or accident is that Buffy had an unplanned pregnancy too early. She was a little more than a 1-year-old then. At that time, we had a German Shepherd mix male dog named Tamir. Once, when she was in heat and we had a full house of guests, they managed to mate, though I was sure the fence separated them. Anyway, the deed was done. Buffy got pregnant and delivered 8 healthy puppies. I'm sure the whole process was taxing, though we fed and supplemented her well, and the whelping went without complications. But still, she was too young for this. Those 2 factors, and perhaps genetics, led to the health crisis that happened in her 6th year of life. One summer day, she started to breathe too hard, like she was suffocating, whistling on the exhale. We were on the walk then. My first thought was that she was overheated. I called my uncle for help and we drove her home. At home, it didn't stop, though we gave her water and poured her underbelly with water too. So we drove her to the vet. At the clinic, they did many tests, and her blood sugar was over the roof. They gave her insulin, I guess, but it didn't work as it should have. I guess at this point, after trying to stabilize her sugar level for a few days, she's got a pyometra too, after more tests and the combined opinions of 2 vets from different clinics. We had no other option but to do a sterilization surgery. It was a life-threatening situation for her because surgery and high blood sugar are a bad combination. In theory, the surgery must have stabilized her blood glucose levels, but it was a theory because vets did not have much experience with the dog's diabetes at the time. It was a very rare condition. Anyway, the surgery was done very well. The vets saved her life and her blood sugar dropped to the more sane levels. After that, Buffy became a dog with diabetes. She was prescribed insulin twice a day before the meal. Needless to say, this diagnosis changed my lifestyle and the routine of our family, and she required constant attention and care, though she looked well and behaved as her usual self. But more than once, insulin worked unpredictably, and her sugar level dropped too rapidly. If she was alone at that moment, we did risk losing her again. So we never left her alone. Now, after many years, I'm almost sure if Buffy had been on the well-balanced barf diet from her puppyhood, she would never have had diabetes or pyometra, even given her early pregnancy. Anyway, as they say, shit happens. Now, I can only call it my experience, and will be glad if it'll be useful to you guys. Some of Buffy's health issues, namely ear inflammation and blocked anal glands, could point to the food she consumed. I felt that the reason for that was chicken in the kibble for the first problem, and generally too soft food for the second. Eventually, we switched her to the kibble based on lamb, and it helped with ear inflammation. So as you can see, on the one hand, as Cane Corso owners, we must know many things, or at least be willing to learn. But on the other hand, it's not always possible to know some stuff, and then we better have the means to correct some issues on the go, with the least damage possible. Okay, I guess that's all I wanted to say in this part. If you want to know how Buffy came into our family, I invite you to see this video. Thank you for watching till the end. It was a long video. I hope my story will be useful to you, or at least entertaining. Stay tuned to see the third part about Buffy's life. In there, I will speak about the last 4 years of her life, most of which we spent in the city. Thank you for watching. Happy days to you and your Cane Corso.